Gen 2, Gen 3 valve bodies, what are the differences? We're going deep into the valve bodies from Gen 2 to Gen 3. We're also going to discuss the upgrades available. The next gen valve body is one topic that comes up quite a bit. I get a lot of questions on that. Today we're going to go ahead and actually discuss the Gen 2 to Gen 3 valve bodies as well as those upgrades. We're going to talk about the thermal bypass valves. There's the barbell mod, there's the stock replacement unit, and then there's the PPE Full Flow valve. Then we will finish up with transmission fluid. We're going to discuss how to properly fill even when you have a bypass valve installed. There's the temperatures. There's a whole lot that goes on into that. Now, if you are new to this podcast, I'm Greg. I'm your host. I also run the DemonWorks YouTube channel as well as the DuramaxNews.com website that has a bunch of information in regards to the 3.0 Duramax diesel. I'm also a GM tech at a local dealership where I work on these trucks every day. So I'm a huge enthusiast of the 3.0 Duramax diesel that I often refer to as the 3MAX, and many of you guys have adopted that term as well. And I think the 3MAX term is a very good term with this. It separates it from the Mini-Max, which came with the 2.8 liter Duramax diesel. But anyway, let's go ahead and get into this podcast, and we're going to start off with the numerous recalls that affect the 10L80 transmission in regards to the LM2 LZ0. And we have one, I'm not going to call off the numbers because it just gets confusing, but we have one where the fix is initially a software update to detect wear 10,000 miles early and default to 5th gear to prevent the lockup. This was later expanded to include Gen 3 valve body replacement for persistent cases. We have another recall that the fix is just a basic software recalibration to monitor the valve pressure and prevent wheel lockup. So obviously, they're trying to fix an issue where there's a fluid issue within the valve body that will create a situation where it actually downshifts and locks up the rear wheels, which could be a safety hazard, and that's why we have the recalls on those. Lastly, we have a bulletin, which a bulletin is different from a recall. The bulletin will tell the GM technician, hey, look at this specific issue here and go ahead and do this specific repair. And this one is in regards to DTC P0747 specifically, and it directs the repair of the valve body with a new plate, valve, and larger spring to fix the pressure loss and prevent lockup and shudder. This ties into the wheel lock recalls at the same wear mechanism. Now, owner reports show symptoms emerging around 30 to 50,000 miles with this, and I've seen this personally. It is factual. 30 to 50,000 miles is typically where we start to see this. Not everybody, not saying specifically everybody is affected, but it is fairly common. And it does get worse with towing and or heat. So just that's a note on there. That's going to be a tie-in to later on when we're talking about different things. Now, the GM fixes have been called Band-Aids by some. And the software detects but doesn't prevent wear, which is a factual statement in my opinion. The Gen 3 valve body, which was introduced in September of 25, aims for a hardware solution with better materials and sediment mitigation. So the Gen 3 valve body is where it's at, in my opinion, and that's where we're going to talk about the Gen 2 versus the Gen 3. Now, roughly October 29th of 2025 is when GM put out a bulletin that discusses the Gen 2 to Gen 3 updates, and we're going to go ahead and break that down. But that bulletin document is 25-NA-334. And basically what it states is that the Gen 2 valve body was the standard one in the 3.0 Duramax diesel trucks. The common issues with it was widespread valve wear. There was TCC shudder vibration. TCC stands for torque converter clutch. Harsh shifts and clunks. There were parts shortages galore. I mean, there was massive back orders in 2025 when this was happening. It just seemed like it was a major issue that everybody seemed to have all at one time, and they just couldn't keep up with it, possibly because they pulled back on valve body repairs because they knew the Gen 3 was coming out. Now, the Gen 3 came out late 2025, as I stated with the date, and as detailed in bulletin number 25-NA334, the Gen 3, which currently is part number 2407-1206, and it is backward compatible with a service update for the Gen 2 equipped vehicles. Now, that means that you can take this Gen 3 valve body, slam it into the Gen 2. It is required to have a reprogram as well. It has to be learned into the transmission. it's not just straight up unbolt and bolt it back in. There are changes in there, specifically with some bolts, and it's critical to do all this correctly. The key changes and enhancements for the Gen 3 valve body are numerous. I mean, we got robustness and sediment mitigation, elimination of the auxiliary body. Now, you will see that when you compare a Gen 2 next to a Gen 3, which I do have a video coming out real soon as far as that goes on the DemonWorks YouTube channel, so be sure to check that out for deeper visuals on that and a little bit more explaining of things. Now we've got relocations and simplifications without or throughout, and that includes internal valving, fluid flow, reduced complexity. Very good changes, I think. This is a pretty significant upgrade from a Gen 2 to a Gen 3. The park inhibit solenoid has been eliminated. Now that doesn't mean that it doesn't need to be plugged in, and there's a note on here that if it's installed and you get a P18A3, that means whoever installed the new valve body forgot to swap over that solenoid, because it does need to be plugged in at a minimum. While it's not used, it needs to be plugged in. We have bolt changes, and these bolts come with the valve body themselves. It's critical to follow the instructions and make sure that they go in the proper locations, different lengths. They need to be torqued. Very, very critical on that. Now, the issues addressed with this and the fixes, it targets the Gen 2's wear-prone valves with better materials and sediment resistance. Early reports show improved vacuum test, which is huge. If it passes vacuum test, that means it's holding much better and not getting the wear. Reduces shudder by optimizing fluid flow, TCC control. That's always a plus. Better fluid flow is absolutely critical. I want to point out that this is backward compatible for the LZ0 and the LM2 trucks, but do know that it also needs to be programmed as well, so you have the most current up-to-date programming. So that's going to be a dealership level item right there. Owners report smoother shifts post-install. Now this is all over the internet, different Facebook groups, different forums, as well as customers that have come in and gotten this valve body and they return for an oil change or whatnot, and I'm talking with them. And a lot of people have had a lot of valve body issues and transmission issues. So when people get their trucks corrected, they like to talk about it. They also like to talk about the negatives. We know that. That's what the internet's all about. But from what I'm seeing from early results here with this Gen 3 valve body is it's actually performing very well. Now, I personally have the Gen 3 valve body on my truck at this time, and I can also agree that there are smoother shifts. It just feels more put together. And it's a significant upgrade, in my opinion, from a Gen 2. So speaking of upgrades, I am always asked about the NextGen drivetrain valve body upgrades. While I do not have personal experience with this, I have looked over the internet, and there's different companies that battle back and forth, but that's what happens with aftermarket companies, is one is always trying to talk down on the other. They want to, not saying that NextGen is doing this at all, I'm just saying in general from what I've seen, is people like to put down other people in order to make themselves look better. So you'll find a lot of negativity on the NextGen. You'll find a lot of negativity on the Suncoast upgrades. I don't want to name all the names on there, but what I will say is the NextGen drivetrain seems to have a very, very good setup here. And one reason that really pops out to me as far as me being able to talk about them is the lifetime warranty. If you offer a lifetime warranty on your product, you really stand behind that product and you believe that everything that you're doing is going to correct all of the issues. So that's why we're going to talk about the Project Carbon, their General Motors 10-speed valve body with lifetime warranty. It comes in at $3,495 right now. There is a $1,000 core charge. That is a pretty decent chunk of money right there, but for the people out there that just want things fixed, done, and over with a lifetime warranty on that valve body, this is probably the best way to go. Now, there's an extensive list of what they do, but before I get into that, I want to talk about just their notes from their website. I have it printed out in front of me, and it says here, this valve body is 100% bolt-in, tuned or untuned in almost all cases. There's a lot of information on here. The owner does participate in some podcasts. He's extremely knowledgeable in everything about these valve bodies. I have belief in him that he does know what he's talking about, and the results are out there, as well as that lifetime warranty. But I'm not going to go over the full list of what they upgrade, but it's quite extensive. So if you're looking for a be done with it upgrade, then by all means, that's probably the way to go. If you want to stick with factory level and you're under powertrain warranty and you like that warranty and you're having some issues, then you're just going to need to go into the dealership and get that diagnosed. And outside of that, we're going to talk about fluid temperatures and what we can do about minimizing the fluid temperatures, because in my honest opinion, I think fluid has a lot to do with these valve body failures as well, with the higher heat. So there are multiple ways to go about it as far as pulling down the transmission temperature, and one of which is the thermal bypass valve. Now, PPE offers one that is a straight flow through design. It's a billet unit, super easy to install, and I do have videos on this install in the DemonWorks YouTube channel. I want to point out that the stock unit opens up around 196 degrees in my testing. I also, since I've had the LM2 and the LZ0, I do know that the LM2 benefited with just an oil pan or like a deeper trans pan in my use. The deeper trans pan and the transmission cooler, I sat around 160, 165 degrees. Now with the LZ0, the routing is actually different in regards to how it goes through the thermal bypass valve. So that's where the free-flowing thermal bypass valve is something that I really like, because it drops the transmission temperature tremendously. Now, we all know temperature kills fluid. It can break it down and cause more issues, and that's why we personally want to bring it down. Now, a lot of people will come back and say, well, that's how it's designed and that's how I want to keep it. And that is all well and good, but keep in mind that this transmission and engine, everything about this was designed to operate at higher temperatures in order to keep the fuel mileage up, because higher temperatures are going to be less drag, it's going to be cleaner for emissions, heat, up to an extent, but they're not really looking at, in my opinion, the extended life of your transmission. So that's where the lower temperatures come into play, and that is where I'm a believer of the lower transmission temperatures. Now, I have tested the PPE bypass valve. I've tested the barbell method. I got a video on that. That's a popular one because what happens is you take your factory thermal bypass valve, you take it apart, and I believe that people like this because it looks stock. And to anybody just wandering through and looking, it just looks like a stock unit and everybody's well and good. The downside to the barbell in my use has been whenever you are towing extremely heavy upgrades or whatever, pushing it hard, the transmission temperature will start to rise. Nowhere near the levels of the factory unit, so don't get me wrong on that, but it does not flow as well as the PPE bypass valve. So I highly recommend, if you're looking for ultimate flow and cooling, the actual PPE bypass valve is the way to go. Now, there is another question out there of the temps too low in the winter time, and that is one that I've discussed, and I've done a bunch of research on this, and honestly, I've come to the point where I'm actually okay with how low the transmission temperatures are. Yes, I will see 100 to 120 degrees personally in my truck when using the barbell or the PPE unit. But as I go through more driving and the front shutters close, the temperature could actually rise. But I want to go back to the fluid as far as it's Dexron ULV fluid, and it does have cold flow at negative 40 degrees. It's definitely capable of flowing in the lower temperatures, and that's one of the good things about this synthetic, super thin transmission fluid is that when it's colder, it's only going to thicken up a little bit, which means that it's still flowing. Now, I'm not saying to go out there and thrash on your truck without it being up to temperature. I'm just saying take it easy whenever the temperatures are lower. Let it build up a little bit of heat as much as it can. And then the worry is, what about condensation? Because when you get hot and cold, you could build up condensation within it. And that's not really an issue as far as my research has gone. It was a concern of mine as well. But if you're only running this at these low temperatures for a month or two or three, then when it gets into the warmer temperatures and the temperature goes up, then you're typically going to burn off that condensation. Getting into fluid, I did come across a bulletin 25-NA-369, and that actually talks about a shudder or vibration felt when driving. And it goes into full detail on what a technician is to look for. But what it comes down to is if the technician diagnoses it as an actual transmission transmission torque converter related issue, they want you to flush the crap out of that fluid, just flow a ton of it, which tells me, since they didn't go into full detail on this, that there is potential fluid issues, and I, again, believe that it's the higher temperatures that are really hurting that. The other question I get when running a bypass valve is there is a specific fluid level temperature, or there's a fluid level check, but the temperature has to be there. So I have the actual documentation right here, and how GM says to do the fluid level check, and then what we're going to do is talk about what do you do whenever you have a bypass valve in place, because that's a super common question. Now I'm going to go ahead and just read off the warning. The transmission fluid temperature must be between 167 to 176 degrees. If the transmission fluid temperature is lower than this temperature range, either idle or brake torque the vehicle to raise the fluid temperature. If the transmission fluid temperature is higher than this range, shut off the vehicle to allow this fluid to cool as required. Setting the fluid level with a transmission fluid temperature outside this range will result in either an overfill or an underfill condition. If transmission fluid temperature is greater than 80 degrees Celsius, transmission will cause fluid to overflow from the vent tube, possibly causing a fire that may result in serious bodily injury or severe vehicle damage. Fluid foaming or pump cavitation. Huge warning there, so definitely you want to get this within temperature. But then for diesel applications, there's a specific add-on here. The transmission fluid level should be checked only after the transmission fluid temperature has reached or exceeded an operating temperature of 221 degrees Fahrenheit. Celsius, that'd be cooking. Once the transmission fluid temperature has reached or exceeded 221 degrees Fahrenheit, let the temperature cool back down to 167 to 176 degrees before checking the fluid level. So what they want you to do is get that valve opened up completely so the fluid is flowing all the way through the cooler and you have fluid throughout. Because if you don't do that, then potentially when it does open up, then the fluid level is going to be low. So it's critical to get it up high so you know that this valve has been opened. Not this valve, but the factory GM valve has been opened. So that raises the question, what do you do when you have a bypass valve installed and you can't get the transmission up to temperature? Well, the way that I do it is I actually fill the transmission fluid. I follow the proper ways of filling it up, get it up to temperature as much as you can, get the fluid in there, and run it through the gears and double check. But what I'll actually do is close up the plug, go out and drive it around for a couple miles, get it as hot as I can, get it back inside, and then drain that fluid out. And typically I'll get the transmission to 120 to 140 degrees. Absolute best case scenario would be go out and drive it around as much as you can and get it back in. If you can get it to 160 plus degrees with the valve in place, then by all means that's best, but you just want to try to get it as hot as possible so that way you can drain the fluid out. But that's the way that I fill it, and I think that's a pretty good way to go. Honestly, when you're running the bypass valve, the transmission fluid temperature does not get that hot, and I'm going to talk about that specifically right now since I have run all three of the valves, the stock one, we've got the barbell, and we have the complete PPE bypass. And what I've noticed is when I'm towing, the transmission temperatures will climb even with the barbell installed, and I've seen temperatures approaching 200 degrees. So that tells me that the fluid flow is not as good as the PPE valve. So if you want the ultimate cooling, you want the valve itself. Now hopefully that answers a bunch of questions. It might have created a bunch more questions for you in regards to this, and I welcome you to send me your questions in regard to this or anything related to the 3MAX Duramax diesel. This is podcast number 8, and we will continue doing these with your questions. This one was compiled from a bunch of your guys' questions. Again, if you want to send me questions that you specifically have, you can either comment on, if you're listening on a podcast on this, or if you're actually watching the YouTube podcast video, comment on one of those, and or you can send an email, and the email is in the description. So till next time, see ya.